How much do you believe in the paranormal? The curse of intensive care will affect you. If you are interested in such content, do not forget to subscribe, comment, and like our channel. Have a good time. It was a cold, gray morning in a small town in northern Russia, where the wind howled like a creature on the hunt. In the heart of the town stood a hospital, known for its calm and routine care. But lately, there had been rumors of strange occurrences in the intensive care unit. The whispers among the nurses and doctors were hushed but persistent. It started small, flickering lights, equipment malfunctioning, and unsettling cold spots in certain rooms. At first, they thought it was just a technical issue, but then it grew worse. On the third floor, where the most critical patients were kept, the atmosphere had changed. The once sterile, quiet halls were now filled with strange noises at night, whispers, soft footsteps, and an eerie hum that seemed to come from nowhere. But the worst was the feeling that lingered in the air, a palpable heaviness that seemed to suffocate anyone who entered. Anastasia, a young nurse who had been working at the hospital for years, noticed it first. Late one night, as she walked down the dimly lit hallway to check on her patients, she felt an icy draft that made her shiver despite the warmth in the building. She turned a corner and saw a shadow dart into an empty room. She froze, her heart pounding. There was no one there, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching her. The next morning, a patient in room 306, an elderly man named Victor, died unexpectedly. His condition had seemed stable the day before, and his sudden passing left the staff baffled. But Victor's death was just the beginning. More patients in the ICU began to die under strange circumstances: heart attacks, strokes, sudden respiratory failure. Though their conditions had seemed stable, no explanation could be found. The hospital administration dismissed the deaths as coincidental, but Anastasia was not convinced. She spent hours scouring old hospital records, searching for any pattern or link between the deceased patients. That's when she found it a chilling pattern. Every one of the patients who had died in the ICU had been admitted during the same week a year earlier. The more Anastasia investigated, the more she began to feel the oppressive presence in the hospital. It wasn't just the eerie noises or the unexplained deaths. It was the feeling that the very building itself was alive with something dark. She confided in her colleague, Mikhail, a seasoned doctor who had seen his fair share of tragedies in his time, but even he was reluctant to believe in supernatural explanations. "We're not dealing with ghosts here, Anastasia," Mikhail told her, though even he could not hide the uncertainty in his voice. There must be a rational explanation. But Anastasia was not so sure anymore. She had seen things that couldn't be explained away. One evening, as she walked through the ICU, she caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of a window. A figure, standing motionless at the end of the hallway. When she turned, there was no one there. The air turned cold again, and the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead grew louder. That night, things escalated. The ICU was struck by a power outage that lasted for hours. The emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the rooms. During the blackout, a nurse named Elena entered the room of a patient named Sergei, who had been in a coma for weeks. When Elena checked his vitals, she gasped. Sergei's eyes were open, staring directly at her, his face frozen in a terrifying expression of fear. But that wasn't the worst part. When the lights flickered back on, Sergei's body was gone. The bed was empty, the sheets twisted and torn as if something had dragged him out of it. The following morning, a report appeared in the local news detailing the unexplained deaths in the ICU and the disturbing events surrounding them. It was labeled as a mystery, but the townspeople spoke of something darker: the curse of the hospital, an ancient evil that had been awakened by the construction of a new ICU building years ago. As the deaths continued, the staff began to believe there was no rational explanation. The hospital was cursed, and something from beyond the grave was claiming the lives of those who dared to enter the ICU. Anastasia and Mikhail, now desperate for answers, turned to local legends. They discovered a story about an old asylum that had once stood on the land the hospital was built on. It was said to have been haunted by the tortured souls of patients who had been subjected to cruel experiments. When the asylum was demolished, its dark history was buried, but the spirits were never at rest. Anastasia knew that they were facing something far more terrifying than they had ever imagined. Whatever force haunted the ICU was not just malevolent, it was vengeful. As the body count grew, and more staff members reported seeing apparitions or hearing strange noises. The hospital became a place of fear. No one felt safe anymore. And then, one night, Anastasia received a call. Mikhail was missing. His locker was found empty, and his car was parked outside, but there was no sign of him. She searched the ICU and the rest of the hospital, calling his name, but there was no answer. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Anastasia realized then that the curse was not just killing the patients, it was consuming everyone, one by one. Desperate and terrified, she confronted the hospital administrator, an older man named Ivan, who had worked there for decades. He confessed that the hospital's construction had disturbed the land's dark history, and the spirits of the dead were angry. As the hospital descended into chaos, Anastasia made a final decision. She had to leave. But as she made her way toward the exit, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She turned to face Mikhail, but his eyes were empty, dark, hollow pits where once there had been life. And in his voice, a whisper echoed, "You should never have come here." The hospital's lights flickered one last time before going out completely. The screams of the remaining staff and patients filled the air, but soon, they were silenced one by one.